Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us. I hope you had a great time during lunch. We were moving forward with our sessions, and I'm excited to introduce Marius Zaharia. Marius is an Azure. Sorry, I'm excited to introduce Marius Zaharia. Marius is an Azure MVP and Advisor, a proactive member of the global Azure community. Marius is also an international speaker, mentor, and a community manager of Azure User Group France. Marius, hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you today?
Nice. I'm glad to speak into your conference.
Yeah, thank you. Really, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today in these days during Corona?
Yeah, actually, as all of us, we are locked down most of our time, right? But
Yes.
at the same time, very, very busy, unexpectedly busy, I would say. Plenty of things to do. So the time passes so quickly.
Well, that's good. So, Marius, I can't wait to hear more about how to do a great plan and build modern architecture in Azure Cloud. Here is your presentation, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so
Have
much,
a great
Vered.
time, everyone.
Thank you. So welcome to my session on the modern architecture in the cloud of 2020. And I will start by showing you this picture, which is very strange, as you can see, with a meme modern architecture, right? The point is that let me just switch my other screen. You have this bizarre table, right? It has modern materials, modern pieces, but you have to learn how to work these modern materials, modern pieces, and also how to assembly, how to compose these materials, how to use them in the right context, because you see this table is somehow in the garden with this is rather a modern interior furniture piece. So this is the message I will try to pass during this session, to understand what are the modern pieces of architectures, and then how to assemble them into your architecture blueprints. So once again, I'm Marius Zaharia. I'm an Azure Tech Lead at Societe Generale, which is the great bank covering the whole globe, I would say. I'm once again pretty active in the Azure community, and you can contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn. You have the addresses there. I won't stay too much there. And this is our agenda. I will speak first of all about the context and challenges we have. We'll try to define together what is the modern architecture itself, and then we'll speak about patterns, which are the pieces we want to use at the end. Modern application architecture patterns and modern deployment models. Then we'll try to compose that. And at the end, we'll speak about transformation, what we need also in our context, in our company, in order to put in place modern architectures in 2020. And so we'll speak about challenges, first of all. So today, more and more companies are planning to be or are already in the cloud, and in the public cloud in particular speak. And large cloud providers like Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS, they deploy a very high speed, a diversity of services and features. It's an enormous cadence, right? And it's because it becomes more and more difficult to find a service within that. So the example there, what will I choose for a web solution? App service, Azure Functions, we'll use VMs, VM sales scales, a Kubernetes cluster. What shall I use? The question comes more and more from today. Then we have, with these changes, we have architectural evolutions, and this accelerates more and more towards new forms and patterns, while still keeping existing ones and adapting them to the new world or to new context. The companies must be ready to apply these new patterns in their implementations. And this is not obvious neither. See that example for coming from an enterprise service bus to the cloud materialization of this concept. How do I do that? Also, there's something that we forget often, that these new architecture choices, these new services coming into our solutions bring potentially risks with that. Because developers or the stakeholders that bring these technologies are pretty passionate on that. They drive the adoption somehow, but sometimes there's no enough look at the whole context within the company and what are the risks of having this service without being well configured, well secured, and so on. And then we have also the situation of these changes moving further the architectural models with more and more, with heavy architecture models come heavy development and implementation processes. So it's not obvious to change the model and then keep the same development and implementation process. Also, the tooling need to evolve and to change. We need to speak about automation in that context. And not in the last point, what's the qualification and the spirit and the culture of the teams working with these architectures. And this is also a very important challenge. It's not actually really the same in this list. So as we see in the challenges we have, we take into the picture the modern architecture, which I try to define in a very simplified way. For me, the modern architecture is a set of concepts and models that make applications faster to implement, more flexible, more economically efficient. So these concepts are essential for us, and these are the things that move, that change a lot these days with the advent of the cloud. Now, once we've said that, for me, the modern architecture relies a lot of two fundamental pillars. The first one is the cloud, in particular the public cloud, which actually gave the opportunity of showing more and more types of services and more different materializations of the same technologies at the beginning, within different forms, different deployments models, as you will see in the next slides. And also the DevOps and agile processes and practices are inevitable to be used in the modern architecture. So if we try to compare very briefly a traditional versus modern architecture, we have on one side things very straightforward until now, like monolithic centralized structure or deployment. We have, of course, databases more as a relational ones, and we have the design is designed for predictable scalability. We have things that are sized that way. They need to keep for years like this, right? And we have strong consistency in the data, for example, and the application relies on that, and so on and so on. On the modern part, on the border / cloud, if you want, we have a rather decentralized system with many different services and instances working together. Also, we design for elastic scale because it's the first time when we have in the history of architecture the way of really having the elasticity of the scale of an application. But that gives also changes of the ways of it is implemented. For example, the consistency of the application, of the data for the application. Once we have, for example, a global coverage, the cloud also give us a global coverage possible for your application, which is awesome. But on the consistency side, we won't be necessarily in a very strong consistency anymore. So we will have maybe possible consistency and delays in the data propagation, things like that. We have asynchronous processing much more than before. And we need to design because of this distributed model for the case of failure. So these are the things that are pretty structural in the way of we design applications and architectures. Okay, so let me just move to the next slide and not to the last one. I have two perspectives in the modern architecture. The first one is the application architecture itself, which is rather around concepts of the application architecture. And the other one is about the deployment architecture, which relies on particular type of services, but they are also conceptualized when they are implemented. So the first one is rather new or revisited application patterns, and the modern deployment architecture is rather brought into the view by the advent of the cloud, by the new ways of deploying applications and services. Okay, let's give some examples first. Just one point, this presentation was made for 50 minutes initially, so I've reduced it so you won't have as much as I have liked examples of different items within the chapters, but still you have enough information to see that represented. Okay, so in the modern application architecture patterns, I will speak of one of the most trendiest things today, which are the microservices, and it's all about restructuring the architecture model within a set of services which are rather independent, loosely coupled, right? And they definitely specialize on a single task. This is the sense of a microservice. So with that, we have a lot of advantages, like more agility on adding new services. We reduce the code footprint. We reduce the team that develop a particular microservice. We could use a mix of technologies. This is a very important point, that we can develop a microservice in Java and another one in .NET and so on. And the scalability, we can vary the scalability of particular microservice in regards to another side. So we are more efficient. The data isolation is better between these services, but on the same side, we have more difficulties with this kind of model, like data integrity, because we need to replicate maybe some data between different microservices and re-synchronize them somehow in order to ensure the coherence. The network congestion and latency becomes maybe an issue, because we have much more verbose exchanges between a much higher number of services working. Is not anymore a single entry point, and which manage all the requests together in the same thread and so on. We have many exchanges, and we have many floors, I would say levels, between calling these microservices together. So more complexity in all this. This gives us the necessity of giving more automation. The surveillance and monitoring, in particular for microservices, become more difficult, because we have to monitor different small pieces instead of the big one, right? So this is one example, important one. I wanted to stay a bit more on that. Another example is the event-driven architecture, which exists from a long time, but this is one of the models that come much more into the figure these days in the cloud. And we have essentially producers and consumers, and we have the event ingestion between the producers and consumers. So this is essentially the event-driven architecture. And we have many other patterns, like the modern workflow with parallel tasks, with connectors, essentially pre-built in the modern approach. The Lambda architecture, which helps treating data in two parallel modes. The one is the batch mode as a classical batch mode, and the other one as a streaming method. The big data, which is now in the picture from a long time, but coming much stronger into the picture these days, because we have much more data now to handle. So the big data is necessary. Also, big compute with a immense number of CPU cores and so on. So these are some of the patterns in the application architecture field I wanted to talk about. Now, speaking about the modern deployment, we have things that are pretty classical, like the compute, like IaaS, infrastructure as a service at the base. But in the cloud, we are starting to see more interesting things, like features that enrich a lot this compute, like automatic patching, change management, automatic backup and restore, and the implementation of operations, and scaling automatically machines in groups, like the scale sets or auto-scaling groups in Amazon, and so on. So this becomes actually like what I like to say that becomes a modern compute concept. It's not anymore a simple compute like a very basic one, but it's more intelligent today, right? Next, I wanted to speak about the enhanced PaaS, or platform as a service. This is something that is in the picture from some time right now, from when the cloud arose at the beginning of 2010, 2012, 2014. PaaS is there, but now PaaS becomes also richer and richer in features, like identity, authentication, authorization. We have multi-slots available in the same application, web application, for example. Very intelligent monitoring and insights coming from the what's happening in the PaaS service. Everything is integrated within the PaaS service itself. So we have all these things as an enhanced PaaS for me. So it changes the service itself. For me, PaaS is a modern service already, but it's strongly enhanced by these new features coming. Okay, serverless, a buzzword today, right? Which is the deployment and execution model, in which the service is provided dynamically by your service provider, and you have allocated dynamically resources in order for you to see only a unit of execution, like a function, like something. The function comes very often into the discussion, but serverless is not just function as a service. There are many things that are proposed as serverless in the cloud today. Speaking of serverless workflow, for example, or even serverless non-relational database, and so on, or even relational. There are flavors as serverless. Next, we'll speak about containers, also another important concept that will stay longer with us, apparently. Yeah. And I won't enter into detail what the containerization is itself. We have essential definition of the abstraction. The sense of it is that it helps a lot for us to increase the surface of our of the utilization of the infrastructure by putting a lot of containers together in the same infrastructure, in the same compute. So this is essentially one container as concept, but also what we are interested in it is that we have more advanced concepts like managed containers, the equivalent, if you want, of a container orchestration. Some of you recognized already the Kubernetes-related logos side, of course, because Kubernetes is the de facto container orchestrator at the end of the fight after a few years. Also, we have what we call serverless containers. So in order to imagine to have nodes and everything behind, in the cloud today, we can have definitely a container deployment, a container execution as a unit. You can have a single container, just run it in the cloud, or we can have a group of them. And we don't have to think of what's the node behind and how to manage these nodes. This is a very strong concept. Okay, so if I'm trying to organize this information in a graph like this, like a tree, we're starting from bare metal, but we're moving further to IaaS, PaaS, and we have derivation like this. We have composite models like managed containers coming from PaaS and containers at the same time, the same for serverless and containers. But this is what is interesting, that it leaves place for the evolutions, because it's interesting to see that it can evolve in the future. And I will pass very quickly about the representative modern services. We have several of them. We have, first of all, for the enhanced PaaS, we have App Service, which is the managed PaaS service in Azure as the reference one. It lets you deploy web applications or web apps, and you can have this hosted on Linux or Windows nodes. It is still useful to master which kind of node you have, because the code execution may be different, depends on what's the operating system behind it, and you have abstraction framework on that. And what's more interesting, that you can have a deployment model which can be a code package or a container. So you can deploy in-app service as a container itself. So this is a very interesting modern service today for me. Azure Functions, which is function as a service in a serverless way in Azure. And also you can deploy this on Windows or Linux and deploy as a code package or container. And as you can see, it fills in the multiple checkboxes, is for microservices, is event-driven by definition, and Azure Function is event-driven, or function as a service, but it's at the same time serverless, and you can deploy it as serverless container. Other services like durable functions, which are orchestration as a service but as code, and logic apps, which is a managed service for implementing business processes, also an orchestration as a configuration if you want. So these are two flavors of the same approach, but with the difference of writing code or writing configuration on other sides. A very interesting way of seeing, but by filling in many other several checkbox that you have there. And also we have Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, which is the managed containers service in Azure, and it lets you deploy microservices essentially, right? You can have also Azure Container Instances, which lets you deploy serverless containers individually or as a small groups. And it comes also in this model of microservices application architecture pattern. So as you can see, we have technologies and services. They are very interesting being modeled. In the same time, they fill in multiple access, multiple checkboxes. There's a complexity of classification and positioning. And for that, we need to use decision matrix and choice matrix, because today it becomes pretty complex to see that. I will just show you two examples of that for building and composing a modern architecture. The first example is to have this kind of choice matrix. When you, for example, choose a particular service or pattern based on your criteria, which are, for example, is the hybrid connectivity supported? And in that case, you will see that several technologies or several services support that, other ones no. Don't forget that this is an evolution, continuous evolution. So features that may not be available today in that service may become available next month. So keeping that in mind. But this kind of matrix helps you select and understand what kind of choice you can do based on your criteria. The second way to do that is to have this kind of decision graph. For example, for choosing a compute service, you have several questions you have to answer to, like do you want to make a lift and shift, or do you want to optimize for the cloud? Can you containerize your workload or not? And so on. And so this way you will arrive at the end to select one particular service or another one. So these are things inspired from the Azure documentation. And you can definitely look for this kind of information, especially the Azure Architecture website portal, in order for you to simplify this choice and simplify this composite building. Okay. And wanted to speak at the end. We are close to the end of our session about the transformation and modernization. A few words. So we spoke a lot about technique, but it's also about the organization. The organization needs to change in order to adapt to these technical things. I have other sessions very specialized on the culture change and organizational change based on recs I had from other companies, for example, or from this company I work with, in order to understand what's the impact. We don't have time to do that, but there is an important focus to do on this part, organizational and culture. And I give you an example here of if we want to do to bring an application in the cloud, we have essentially three big choices. The first of it is the lift and shift as is. Okay, and actually it's not even a choice from initial part, but it's also a workflow at the end that we could apply if you want. The first is lift and shift, so we take it as is and put it in the cloud. No big change. We take VMs, IaaS, and so on. And this is pretty straightforward, I would say, but we don't gain too much from that. The second one is to optimize this IaaS in order to have the good scalability, automatic scaling, consumption, to simplify some complexity, to automatize deployments, monitoring, things like that. There are many things that can be done. And the last point here is the modernization, which lets you make deep changes in the architecture in order to apply directly native cloud services and native cloud concepts. You can do that sequentially in order to gain experience in the cloud by following these steps, or also if you need to go much faster and have the founding necessary, you do restructuring your application and modernize directly in order to deploy it to the cloud. And it's much faster, but it takes more effort to do that. It's much more intensive. Okay. And just one word to come back to this essential way of thinking in order to apply these modern architecture concepts, applying DevOps, applying short cycles of developments, sprints, applying all this agile ritual, generally speaking, helps a lot in changing these architecture patterns and applying modern architecture. From my experience, it was essential, and actually you cannot dissociate really one from another. And as a conclusion, the modern architecture is think differently, not necessarily better. There are things that are not necessarily better in the modern architecture that in the classic one. Think of the complexity of a distribution and verbosity, things like that. But in the same time, is an important change that you can leverage in order to have better return for your application. You leverage the best services of the cloud, but of course you need to understand well how the cloud works and do the right choices. This is where the experience in modern architecture comes, and you need to apply the optimal transformation for your own team for that. So it's not only technique, but also organization. So this is was my session. Hope you liked and kept a good learning from that. And let me know if there are any questions on that. I see a question in Hebrew, and I don't speak Hebrew. Please let me know, Verd, if I can answer to anything.
Yes, hi, Marius. First of all, that was a really good session. I think you provided a great overview of the main pillars which enable the creation of robust cloud architecture.
Yes.
I think that I really think that the organizational aspects that you mentioned are a huge factor in cloud adoption journey.
Absolutely.
And this is for another session. It can be like a full session just to talk about.
Yes, we can do a sequel, of course.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Marius. I really enjoy your talk, and thank you very much for joining us. Do you have any? You want to say like a closure, something?
Yes, just be confident to follow these efforts and invest these efforts in modernizing your architecture and be on the same path with the cultural change that need to be done in your company with that, and you will arrive having very strong applications in the cloud.
I hope, yes. So thank you very much, Marius. Thank you very much. So thank you everyone for watching. Our next session will be held in Hebrew. The session will be held by Ido Katz. So I'm switching to Hebrew now. אז תודה לכל הצופים. הסשן הבא על ידי עידו קאץ ידבר איתנו, ייתן לנו ככה tips and tricks, איך לחסוך בעצם עלויות, לחסוך כסף בשימוש באז'ור. יהיה מאוד מאוד מעניין, שווה לשמוע. נצא עכשיו לרבע שעה של הפסקה.